Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Ron Block.
And I'm Mary Kay Andrews.
And this is Friends and Fiction, 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, and librarians. If you're not with us already, we hope you'll join our Facebook group, which is now more than 250,000 members strong. We'd also like to invite you to follow us on Instagram and YouTube and subscribe to our Substack newsletter, which is full of awesome bonus content. You can find out more about our community and all we have to offer at friendsandfiction.com.
And I'm here to remind you about the Friends and Fiction 2025 book subscription box, available only through our friends at Oxford Exchange. For one all-in price, you'll get 3 separate shipments in 2025. That's this year. In March with Patti's new book, in May with Kristy's, and in June with Kristin's. All of them signed, all of them hardcover first editions. Plus, you'll get exclusive gifts, a Friends and Fiction friendship bracelet and card magnet that are available only in this bundle. So visit Oxford Exchange now to get yours. You can link to that from our website too at friendsandfiction.com. And do not forget about our upcoming Friends and Fiction live event happening on St. Patrick's Day in Atlanta. All 4 of our hosts, me, Kristin, and Kristy, plus Ron and Meg, will join Patti to celebrate the launch of her new novel, The Story She Left Behind. Come meet up with all of us in person at the Atlanta History Center the evening of Monday, March 17th. Get your tickets now before they sell out.
I am so excited for that event. I love that book so much, and people are just going to be all over it. I can't wait. Okay, on this episode, we are thrilled to welcome #1 New York Times bestselling author C.J. Box to discuss his new novel, Battle Mountain, which just came out on February 25th, and we're so excited to talk to him about it. There's the cover. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest before we bring him on. He's the #1 New York Times bestselling author that I've set up over 30 novels, including his wildly popular Joe Pickett series. CJ won the Edgar Award for Best Novel for Blue Heaven in 2009. Over his career, he's also won the Anthony Award, the Prix Calibria 38, the Maltese Falcon Award, the Macavity Award, the Gumshoe Award, 2 Barry Awards, and the 2010 Mountains and Plains Independent Booksellers Association Award for Fiction. Ooh, that's got to be a big shelf holding all those.
Yeah.
He was recently awarded the Western Heritage Award for Literature by the National Cowboy Museum, as well as the Spur Award for Best Contemporary Novel by the Western Writers of America.
Over 10 million copies of his books have been sold in the U.S. and abroad, and they've been translated into 27 languages. 2 television series based on his novels are in production. Big Sky on ABC and Joe Pickett on Spectrum Originals and Paramount Plus. CJ is an executive producer for both series. He's going to be a busy guy. And also, 3-Inch Teeth, his 24th novel in the Joe Pickett series, was published in February 2024 and debuted at #2 on the New York Times bestseller list and at #1 on the Apple eBooks bestseller list. CJ is a Wyoming native and has worked as a ranch hand, surveyor, fishing guide, a small-town newspaper reporter and editor, and he owned an international tourism marketing firm with his wife, Lori. He and his wife live on their ranch in Wyoming, and they have 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren.
Wow. His new book, Battle Mountain, is the latest installment in CJ's fan-favorite Joe Pickett series and follows outlaw falconer Nate Romanowski, who's off the grid and out for revenge as one of the storylines. We are ready to talk about this. Sean, can you bring CJ on? Hello there.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. We've got so much to talk about, but let me start by congratulating you on the 25th Joe Pickett novel. How does that feel?
Well,
That's got to feel great.
it does. It's kind of surprising to me when I think about it, because I never knew there'd be a second Joe Pickett novel. So certainly didn't look 25 books ahead. So it amazes me when I think about it.
That's great. So will you start by sharing with us what the book's about? And as we like to ask here, what are the major themes that you wanted to explore beneath the surface?
Well, sure. You mentioned that the protagonist of the series is a Wyoming game warden named Joe Pickett, and this is a Joe Pickett novel. But throughout the series, one of the primary characters, Joe's kind of sidekick friend, is named Nate Romanowski, who's an outlaw falconer. He's also got a special forces background. And in the last book, most of my books very much stand alone. This one is kind of a continuation of a theme that was left open at the end of 3-Inch Teeth. And that is what Nate Romanowski's family is brutally attacked. His wife is killed, murdered, and he's devastated. And Battle Mountain begins with Nate on the hunt for the guy who's responsible for that, a guy named Axel Soledad. Nate is enlisted by a fellow falconer friend of his named Geronimo Jones, and they work their way across Wyoming and Montana, hunting Axel Soledad. Joe Pickett, in a wholly separate storyline, is recruited by the governor to try to find his son-in-law, elk hunting guide, who's gone missing. Both storylines converge in the end with Nate and Joe at the place called Battle Mountain.
Yeah, they come together in a fairly explosive congruence. What sparked the idea for writing Battle Mountain, CJ? In general, what inspires you to keep creating these fresh stories for Joe and your other recurring characters?
Well, this one is very, very much plot driven because of the incidents that occurred in the last book. I mean, Nate Romanowski does need to get revenge or try to get revenge, and that's I think that's obvious for anyone who read the last book. But the other thing that I always try to put issues and different controversies, different topics in the books that are not so much about who done it, but things that I'm interested in, things I think the reader will be interested in. Part of the Battle Mountain, there's Axel Soledad, the bad guy, has assembled some real misfits and ex-military to go after a big kind of very private convention made up of the military-industrial complex that flies into a very isolated dude ranch in Wyoming every year. And I based that group on a real group, not the same name, and changed a lot of the particulars that happens every year in a little town where I live in, where private jets from all over the country fly in, little jets park under the wings of big jets, and all of the corporate executives and defense contractors get together and go out and play cowboy on a dude ranch for about 4 days. And the joke around here has always been, because this has been going on for 50 years or so, that one bomb on this dude ranch would pretty much destroy the military-industrial complex of the U.S. And I've always kept that in mind and worked that into the plot of this book as well.
It's very cool. So you're touching on it, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about one of the major conflicts in here is the citizens of the area and their conflict with the federal government, because they obviously have a very strained relationship between the two. Can you talk a little bit about that approach and how you kind of weave it into your story?
Sure. Actually, I try to reflect as best I can the culture of the area of the Mountain West in all of the books I have since the very first one. And one big fact that sometimes is kind of unbelievable to people who live east of the Mississippi is that the western states, like Wyoming is half owned by the federal government, therefore managed by a slew of different federal agencies. And those agencies' agendas change depending on who the Interior Secretary is and who the president is. So those who work in extractive industries like mining or timber or energy, every 4 years, may lose their job and have everything redirected. So there's a lot of tension between people on the ground and the federal land managers who aren't elected but assigned. So that I try to reflect that tension in the books, and it also makes for a strange situation where there are so many different kinds of law enforcement on the ground. Every agency has its own law enforcement. The FBI is in charge of the Indian reservations, so the law enforcement personnel themselves clash over territory and jurisdiction. So as Michael Connolly says, tension on every page. Well, anything on the ground here, there's tension on every page.
There is, but the one thing I like about it is that you point out that there are good and bad people from all viewpoints.
Absolutely, there are. I mean, these are not agenda books, but I do want them. I do hope that they reflect some of the thoughts on the ground.
Right.
Yeah. The book is releasing at a pretty fraught time right now.
Yes, it is.
But let's talk about structure. The book is told from several viewpoints, each one seemingly on their own path, who we come to realize, as we mentioned before, are all headed literally to the same destination. I'd love to hear about your process in weaving those together while, as you said, ratcheting up the tension so tightly on the reader. I mean, my fists were in balls when I was reading this, CJ.
I know.
Good. I love to hear that. I'd love to hear that. No, it makes it more complicated. You as writers know, to have various storylines, interweaving storylines. It's a lot easier to go straight forward from start to finish from a single point of view. But I think I love the idea always of having different storylines where that only the reader knows everything. The participants in the story do not know what the other ones are doing. So the reader, I think it creates a lot of tension because the reader knows what's going on with the other people in the book, but the protagonist does not. Nate Romanowski does not. The bad guy doesn't know who's coming. And I think that just creates a level of tension there, and you wonder how it's all going to interact. It's kind of a high wire act, and every time I just, hope I stick the landing.
Well, that leads me to ask, are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
A panther? What is a panther?
Pantser. Do you write by the seat of your pants, or are you a plotter do you make like storyboards, outlines like that?
I do an outline. I always start first with the research on the topic that I'm going to try to weave the storyline through. That can be anything from like energy development, resource, wildlife issues, endangered species, whatever. Do the research. I go out and interview people on both sides of controversial topics. And then I do a bullet point outline, starting with the beginning, pretty much all the way through the book. Then I start writing literally on top of that outline. And that doesn't mean it won't change or take different variations throughout, or even end differently than I originally plotted it. But at least then I never sit down any day and just stare at a blank screen and say, what am I going to do today? I've never done that.
Oh, that's what I'm in the midst of doing. Good for you.
You talked a little bit about the research, but one of the things that comes across so much in the book is the atmospheric setting that you write. You write about Battle Mountain. We've been there with you before, but you really get the lay of the land, and you really bring the reader to the location that you're writing about. So all the locations for elk hunting and the ranches and all the trails. I mean, did you have to map all that out, or did you just is it just something inherent in you?
I do some mapping, I do sometimes for this one, especially because we have so many people moving in the same directions, and I don't want to confuse anyone with geography, where things are located. I drew out a little map for myself, so I could try to keep track of that. But since part of the book is based on real geography of the area I live in, there really is a Battle Mountain. There really is a Dude Ranch. So I was able to draw on those, although I moved them around. But yeah, I think brevity is everything when it comes to action sequences, and just to write as clearly as possible because it's so easy to get confused on who's doing what, where, and what's their location. Sometimes I feel more like a movie director than a writer.
That makes sense because it comes across that way too. Very cinematic.
Yeah. Would
Thank
you
you.
talk about some of your our favorite characters, Mary Beth, and Nate and Geronimo? Mary Beth obviously has been on scene for a while. How did they first appear to you to write, and are they based on anybody?
The only character in the series that's based on a real person is the most outlandish one, which is Nate Romanowski. And he's based on a friend of mine that I went to high school with. He was ahead of me. He was a middle linebacker on the football team. He went off to the Air Force Academy and to Special Forces, but he was a falconer. And I went falconry hunting with him for years, met his falconry friends, went falconry hunting with them, hung out at their weird little compounds, and got into the head of falconers. So I still draw on that. But the rest are pretty much fictional characters. Mary Beth, of course, is Joe's wife. That's an important aspect of these books, is that, unlike a lot of PIs or detectives or cops, Joe Pickett is a state employee, a family man. He dotes on his daughters. He knows his wife is smarter than he is, and his daughters have now grown up over the length of the series and have left the nest. So that family aspect is an important part of every book too. In this one, as you know, both Joe's older daughter and Mary Beth play a pretty pivotal role in the things that happen.
I always like it when the wife gets to be the voice of reason.
I think I can't imagine any other circumstance.
Whew, safe. Well, let's talk about you, your career a little bit.
Sure.
So you've held a lot of positions prior to writing novels. You've ranch hand, fishing guide, and reporter, to name just a few. How did some of those past professions inform your writing? And then how did you make the leap to books?
Well, in a weird way, all of them led me that direction. I always knew I would be a writer. I didn't know what I'd write. I think if you're a writer, you're just simply hardwired to write, whether successful or not. I didn't have a real plan. But I now can say honestly that almost everything I've ever done was training for what I do now, especially when I used to work out in the country as a surveyor and fishing guide, and I used those things. But also I was involved in tourism promotion for years, and my job was to take foreign journalists and tour operators and travel agents around the Rocky Mountain West. So I got to do these things very intimately: horseback trips, skiing, whitewater rafting, all those kind of things that were, just great training for what I do now, because I've got some experience in them and I know where to reach out to for expertise on those things. So I'm not completely blind.
No. Do you remember when you got your first contract?
Oh, yes, vividly. I was involved in the tourism industry. I was at a international trade show, and I got the email that Penguin Putnam wanted to accept the first book, open season, and they wanted 2 more with Joe Pickett as the protagonist. And it was the first time I ever even thought about a series, but of course I committed to it, and that was 25 years ago.
Yeah, you never forget that moment, do you?
No, I was telling everybody I knew what happened, and nobody quite understood what I was talking about, because they didn't know I wrote. And neither did my daughters at the time, who were 14. Until I had a book contract in hand, they didn't know what I did in my office. Because I never wanted them to think of, my dad, the failed novelist. So I never said, I'm really working on this book, girls. I waited until I said, you'll be able to read this next year.
It's a great feeling.
I know. I'd love to know the guesses they had for what you were doing in there.
We had my wife and I ran a company, international tourism marketing company. So, I had things to do.
Yeah.
Now, there was a recent Wall Street Journal article, speaking of newspapers, about you in Battle Mountain, featuring an off-the-beaten-path idea you had to lure younger readers into your writing world and signing events. How did you come up with that approach? And how can I steal that idea, CJ?
I wish that I could claim that I came up with that approach, and that is appearing on podcasts that aren't necessarily book podcasts, but interest podcasts. I have never approached a podcaster. They've all asked me. So I've over the years, I've done podcasts with rodeo podcasts, fly fishing, hunting, some political ones. They've always reached out because of something they've seen in the books and wanted to discuss those things. And I didn't realize at the time that it would someday be thought of as a strategy, but it did bring in I think the hardest thing in the world is to attract new readers, and probably the toughest thing is attract young men into reading novels. And most of them came about. I started noticing that a couple of years ago when, fishing guide looking guys with beards and caps would be standing in line at a signing. And I'd think, where did you come from and why are you here? And I would ask them, and they would mention a fishing, Meat Eaters podcast. That's a huge one in the hunting world. And so I continue to do that. I won't turn any of those requests down. Game warden, there's podcasts for everything. I've done game warden podcasts.
How fun. Okay, so for the one or two listeners who might not know, you told us a little bit about your first contract, but go back a little bit before that and tell us about the creation of Joe Pickett. How did he first come to you, and what did you do with the idea when you got it?
It was like so many things. It's still it was issue based. I was a reporter on a small town Wyoming newspaper, and at the time, I had grown up with seeing these little posters around the state with a crude drawing of a weird little creature called a black-footed ferret, because the creature was thought extinct, possibly. And it basically, the poster said, if you see this creature, call this number, this federal agency. And at the time I was working at the newspaper, the creature was discovered around a little town in northern Wyoming. And it turns out all the residents there had known about these colonies of these black-footed ferrets for years, and no one had ever made the call. And I thought, what an interesting kind of New West story, involving all the things we've talked about. And I wanted to rewrite that story. And first protagonist was going to be a sheriff, and then a journalist, which is what I was. And I settled on a game warden because I was doing ride-alongs with a local game warden. And I saw how they would be intimately involved with the discovery of an endangered species. So that's how Joe Pickett came to be. They could be game wardens in Wyoming have very unique responsibilities. They're very independent. They're very heavily armed. They can rarely get backup. Almost everybody they encounter in the field is armed. It's a very unique kind of thing. It's not the same in every state, but it certainly is here. And I thought that's the kind of protagonist to drive this story. Again, not thinking 25 books later that it would still be there.
No, but it keeps going. And so he's such a nuanced character that people are just like drawn to, and they want to know more. And there's a lot about him to like.
Well, good. Thank you. I try to keep him realistic. I think that's the most important thing. And he's not the smartest or toughest guy. He gets himself in trouble all the time by making mistakes. But I think that it not only increases the tension, but makes him more empathetic to the reader, right. I hope.
Yep. Relatable.
For sure. Okay, so you have epitaphs from the peregrine at the beginning of each chapter. Can you talk about inserting those?
Sure. I always have epigraphs in the books. I'm kind of a predator for those. When I read or look at quote books, I have a long list that I can apply. I always like them to kind of, predict or enlighten what's going to happen next. But this is the first time I've ever used just one book. And lines from just one book throughout, and that's The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. And it's very much a cult classic among falconers, but also people who like to read about nature. And it's one man's obsession with, he was English in the 1960s, of going out every day and writing his field notes for that day and becoming so obsessed with peregrines that by the end of the book, you kind of start to feel like he thinks he is one. So it's very, very, like I said, hopefully this will introduce some people to that book.
Yeah, I had to look it up. I was like, oh, it's because it's more than just that. It's philosophical. You could really relate a lot of other things to it.
Yes, and his descriptions and kind of the bloody-minded nature of falconry comes through, but also the beauty of it, and I love it.
Yep, that comes through in the story too. Okay, CJ, if you'd stick around, we have more to talk to you about. But first, a few quick reminders for our listeners and viewers out there.
For all of you watching and listening, we encourage you to rush out and buy your copies of Battle Mountain. And the perfect place to do that is in the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org. You'll not only be getting it at a discount, but all your purchases there support our show, CJ, and indie bookstores nationwide. And don't forget to visit friendsandfiction.com for details on our show schedule, upcoming in-person events, and links to the award-winning Friends and Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa, our merch store, and our Substack newsletter sign-up.
Phew. And speaking of our Substack, you can read all our free weekly posts on the Substack website or app, or subscribe for free to get them directly in your inbox. And if you do upgrade to our paid Substack, which costs just $5 a month, you'll have access to deeper dives with all our weekly show guests, plus monthly roundtable discussions like the amazing one we just did on writing tips, and the one Mary Kay Andrews has coming up about rom-coms, plus bonus Q&As with additional authors like the recent ones we ran with Linda Cohen-Loigman, Joe Finder, and Marie Benedict. Friends and Fiction 4 hosts and founders also host occasional private VIP Zooms exclusively for our subscribers. If you enjoy tuning in for our weekly author interviews, this is a big way you can support us for basically the cost of a single cup of coffee each month. Check us out at friendsandfiction.substack.com.
Okay, CJ, what's up next for you? I mean, we know you've got another podcast to record. But will there be any more? Will there be any more of the popular short stories?
I've been writing a few short stories. I don't have enough to collect them yet for a collection. I have a plan to do that because I enjoy short stories. I like writing them. Got some more ideas, but that'll be down the road after this book is out and this book tour is over. But first on the agenda when I get back is the next Joe Pickett novel. It's about halfway through it now. I almost hate to set it aside because it's really starting to roll. But I can't. I have trouble writing on the road, so I'll set it aside. Come back, and the 26th Joe Pickett novel probably out due next year about the same time.
Good. Tell us where everybody watching and listening, where can they find you online, and of course, where can they find you on tour in the coming weeks?
Sure, everything is on cjbox.net. Also have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram that my daughter runs, not me. But I'll be in starting on the February 24th, Sun City, Arizona, Scottsdale, Dallas, Houston, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Denver, Rollins, and Casper, Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then the Des Moines Book Festival.
Great.
Whoa, that's a tour.
Yes.
Okay, CJ, thank you so much for talking about Battle Mountain and Joe Pickett and your stellar career and all of the work that you do. It's such a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for being with us on the Friends and Fiction Show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Learned a lot.
Be sure to tune in next week when Kristin and I will welcome Colleen Oakley to discuss her new novel, Jane and Dan at the End of the World. That show will air on the Friends and Fiction Facebook page and YouTube channel on Wednesday, March 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And it'll be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, March 7th.
Well, thanks to all of you out there for being with us. We will see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're so glad you're here.